afternoon, and happy spring solstice. Today is officially the first day of spring, so I hope this brings wonderful weather and flowers and all kinds of nice things. So today I'd like to talk about fear and how we can deal with that. So many years ago, probably 45, 46 years ago, I had to give my very first Dharma talk. I was at Kopan Monastery, and it was just a small group of people, but I was still quite young, early 20s, and recently ordained, and habitually shy. So I was really terrified. And as the time got closer, the fear got worse. So I knew I had to do something about it. So I sat down and just looked at what was going on in my mind and found ways of working with my mind, managing my mind, so that I was able to do the talk. And it probably wasn't the greatest talk ever, but at least nobody booed or walked out. So I figure it went okay. So I kind of, on my own, out of necessity, I found this way of working with fear and anxiety. And I've used it a number of times over the years as well. And then a few years ago, I read a book that was recommended by a friend called Buddha's Brain. And the author is Rick Hansen, who's a neuropsychologist, as well as a meditator and a teacher of meditation. And I really like this book. It weaves together the two traditions of neuroscience, brain science, and also Buddhism and meditation in a really nice way. It's funny, humorous, light, and easy to read, relatively. And in this book, he has a whole section on working with fear. It's called Feeling Safer. If you happen to have the book, it's in chapter 5. And so when I read through this section, I was kind of happy to find that he had ideas similar to what I had used in the past, a method for working with fear. And so I thought to share this with you today, because some of you might be feeling some fear and anxiety. Quite understandable in these days of so many troubles happening in our world. So this practice has a few steps. So I'm just recommending what I have found helpful, but of course you can alter it and find your own ways of working on this. But the first thing to do is to sit down and relax. Try to calm down your mind. It's good to watch the breath. Actually, he says in the book that this is one of the things that does help us to calm down, breathing, physiologically, especially deep breathing, taking even just one or two deep breaths, and the long, slow exhalation, exhaling slowly. That really does bring about a change in our body, helps us to be more relaxed. So do some breathing meditation for a few minutes to clear your mind. And then investigate why you're afraid. What exactly is it you're afraid of? And this is something Venerable Children asked us to do last night in the meditation. So examine your fear, and not just in a general way, well, I'm afraid of giving this talk, or I'm afraid of getting coronavirus, but more specific. Why is that so scary? What about that experience are you scared of? So try to be really, really specific. So like when I did this in the past, before my first Dharma talk, I sort of had these ideas in my mind that it was going to be a total disaster. I was going to get there in front of people and just freeze. My mind would go blank, and I just not be able to think of anything to say, or I would say something, but it would just be gibberish. And I just make a total fool of myself, and they would be disgusted with me, and it was like my whole life would be ruined, that kind of thing. So check carefully. Why am I afraid? What is it? There's something your mind is imagining, creating these probably worst case scenarios about this experience. that you're dreading. So take some time to do that and really try to be specific what it is that you're so afraid of. And then the next step, once you've figured that out, is to kind of do a reality check. Like how realistic it is that what you're afraid of is really going to happen. So I think what our mind does is it creates this worst case scenario, and then it believes 100% that is what's going to happen and there's no way around it. So that's probably not true. There might be a possibility that this will happen, but maybe not. Like, for example, with the coronavirus, if people are afraid of getting this sickness and dying of it, I think the statistics are, 3-4% of people actually die from it? I think that's what I read or heard. Which means even those who get it, of course not everyone's going to get it, but even those who do get it, only 95 or 96, 7% will survive. Only a small number will die of it. So if you look at the facts, the reality, have a more realistic view of the situation, you'll probably realize that your fears are exaggerated. Yeah? So that's something that could be helpful to reduce your fear. And then since there's some possibility that what you imagine will happen will actually happen, then the next thing to do is ask yourself, okay, if this terrible thing does happen to me, is there anything I can do to prevent it or to prepare myself from it? To prepare myself for it. So sometimes there are things we can do to try to prevent this terrible thing from happening, like washing our hands, or if it's a Dharma talk, preparing for it. Think ahead of time what you're going to say, write it down, rehearse it. So making yourself prepared for this situation that you're dreading, that can be really helpful. And also, maybe there are people that can help you. Because again, our mind may sometimes have the idea that, oh, I'm going to have to face this experience all alone. Nobody's going to be there to help me. But that may not be true either. Okay? So sometimes we can turn to friends, to family, to teachers, or even to the internet. There's lots of information on the internet that might help to reduce our fear and help us to see things more realistically. So look for help. And often people are really happy to help. You don't have to feel like you're imposing on people, making problems for them. People are happy to help. And then also for us following the Buddhist path, there's lots of help in the teachings in the form of methods, very, very practical methods. So many different methods in the teachings for working with difficult situations, difficult emotions that come up in our mind. So do research and make yourself familiar with some of those methods so that you're prepared. Even if this terrible thing does happen, there are ways you can deal with it to make it better. Because sometimes when I look at my own mind and why I'm afraid of a certain situation, what I find is I'm afraid of losing control. I'm afraid of my mind just being swept away with disturbing thoughts and emotions, and I won't be able to manage it. So that's what Buddhism is all about, is how to manage our mind. And it can be managed. It's not impossible. There's lots of things. We have to learn and we have to practice. We have to, train ourselves. But it is possible to manage your mind. Even the most difficult thoughts and emotions, even the most difficult experiences, there are things you can do to get through those experiences and make them better. So those are just a few suggestions, things you could do if you do find yourself feeling afraid. And in the book, Buddha's Brain, the author says, most fears are exaggerated. As you go through life, your brain acquires expectations based on your experiences, particularly negative ones. When situations occur that are even remotely similar, your brain automatically applies its expectations to them. If it expects pain or loss, or even just the threat of these, it pulses fear signals. But because of the negativity bias, many expectations of pain or loss are overstated or completely unfounded. So he mentions negativity bias. He says that the way our brains work is that they're constantly looking out for signs of danger or threats. And as soon as they see something or hear something, they get fixated on that and get stuck on that. He says it's like Velcro. Our brain works like Velcro with negative things. But when it comes to positive things, it's like Teflon. They just slide off. So, sounds familiar? So this is the way our brains work. We're all the same. But it can be changed by deliberately focusing more on positive things. Our brain will start to pay more attention to those and experience those more. And by working on these negative things, then they will become less. So it's definitely possible. And one last thing, I love this verse from Shantideva. That's so helpful in these kind of situations where he says, this is a paraphrase, why be unhappy or worried about something if it can be remedied? So if there is something we can do, do it. And what is the use of being unhappy or worried about something if it cannot be remedied? So if there's nothing that we can do, we do as much as we can. There's always something we can do. And then when we've done as much as we can and can't do any more, well, the best thing is to just accept the situation. And then as Buddhists, we always have practices, taking refuge, praying, practicing mindfulness, so many practices we can do. So there's always something we can do in situations in which we feel some fear or worry or anxiety. So I'll talk more about this next time. There's some other suggestions of things we can do to deal with fear and anxiety, but I just wanted to share that for today. Thank you.